No one just wakes up good with a sword. You have to bleed into this. You have to train. You have to sweat. You have to doubt yourself before you move further. And that's what I'm going to talk about today, which is the evolution of HEMA longsword fighter specifically. But of course, the general path of anyone's journey in sword fighting, from the very beginnings to the master levels. So I'll start with the level 0, uninformed, the NPC. The NPC doesn't have any of these swords. He doesn't have any training tools whatsoever, because he's just that. He's just the uninformed person, the NPC. He has a chance of owning some random katana from some anime, or a medieval longsword which is placed on his wall in his room. Or maybe he has some, I don't know, plastic sword somewhere in his house. But most importantly, he knows sword fighting and swords in general only from anime, movies, stories, cartoons, and generally from media. Of course, the NPC doesn't have the knowledge or the awareness of how to use a sword in sword fighting or how they were used. And of course, he lacks the context and the wider understanding of combat in general. The only real swords that the NPC person ever saw were bad quality replicas of swords in some renovated castles, which most often do not are fake. Of course, the minority of them is real, but it's just the minority. Of course, the NPC also thinks that swords are heavy. Well, some of them are, but most of them aren't heavy. And moving back to the movies, so the media that the NPC consumes, he often doesn't know proper names of the swords. He doesn't know that there's different categories for swords, like a arming sword, like a longsword, like a two-handed swords, like Montante and Zweihander, or there's a Renaissance swords like rapier, probably with dagger as well, or a side sword, or a saber later on, or a broadsword, which is most commonly named as a longsword, or a longsword is named as a broadsword in this media, which is just mind-blowing for me. The NPCs are often ignorant, but to be honest, that is not their fault. They think that swords are heavy because they saw this one dude in this movie called With Fire and Sword, where he cut off 3 heads at once with this huge two-handed sword, which was a long sword, which was named in this movie as a broadsword, which wow. Also, the NPC knows only the basic martial arts, most commonly box, kickboxing, or MMA. And he doesn't realize that there's more weapon martial arts, like historical European martial arts, like Kendo, like Iaido, and etc. So, as I said, the NPC is just ignorant, but that is not their fault. And to be honest, this stage is the 95% of population worldwide. The next level is level 1, the medieval history enjoyer. The medieval history enjoyer often is a gamer as well, and he is this type of gamer who always or nearly always chooses the warrior class or the knight class in RPGs. But also, the medieval history enjoyer, of course, watches a lot of YouTube content about medieval weapons, so swords as well, armor, and different combat scenarios or battles specifically. And sometimes the medieval history enjoyer stumbles upon HEMA content on his sidebar recommendations and starts to watch it, but a little. He sees that they are people who are training swords, but he doesn't know how to start, or he's not really into it for now. Also, the medieval history enjoyer has more chance to own this fake medieval longsword or katana in his home, and sometimes he unsheaths it or just grabs it to just swing it lightly. But of course, because of the fact that these swords are fake and they're heavy because they aren't meant for combat, he still is somewhat ignorant. He still thinks that swords are a bit heavy, but a bit less so, because he has a wider context and knowledge of combat, of medieval combat specifically. And that's why he is proud of his knowledge. But yes, he's a bit still ignorant, but a bit less so. He also learns that real knights and real samurai weren't fighting like in movies. So he watches content about myth busting, about medieval combat from movies, and sees that combat in movies is just a choreography. It's not a real fighting. He still doesn't know proper techniques whatsoever, but he has the spark of curiosity into the real thing, or into the real facts of sword fighting. So how it looked for real and how fast it was, for example, perhaps. So if you're here, that's good. You're just waking up. So the next one is level 2, the HEMA beginner practitioner. The difference between the medieval history enjoyer and the HEMA beginner is that the HEMA beginner starts to do the real thing. Of course, without any knowledge whatsoever, but he gets into the rabbit hole of some techniques. And most of all, he tries it for himself. He doesn't just watch someone doing it, but he actually picks up a training tool, could be even a stick, and starts to swinging wildly without proper technique, without edge alignment and anything whatsoever, but he starts to feel it for real. So the HEMA beginner joins a HEMA club and goes to the class for the first time, or he buys his own beginner training tools and starts to do it at home or at his backyard. And through this, he learns pretty fast that it's not as easy as it looks. Of course, at the beginning, as everything, he learns that there is more weapon categories to train than just longsword. For example, there is a saber. It's not a saber, it's an arming sword, but imagine it's a saber. There is a rapier with dagger. There's a sword and buckler. There's a side sword and even more than that. For example, Zweihander and Montante, or even polearms. And there is a chance he tries every one of these weapons one by one. And of course, he chooses his main pick, his main one. For me, it was, of course, longsword. But I know people that in this stage usually pick or branch out into two different paths. Either they pick longsword as their main weapon, or saber. Of course, the HEMA beginner makes a fundamental mistake, which is the most common one for beginners, which is he buys the sword before he buys the training mask, the fencing mask, I mean, the protection to his head. And he learns pretty fast that the fencing mask is more important to actually train and to spar with someone than just a padded longsword. Of course, These two things are the fundamental tools of this stage of our HEMA beginner. But I'm talking from my experience. I made the mistake of buying even a steel sword before I even had any HEMA gear, which was a mistake. The HEMA beginner also learns that when he actually sword fights with someone, it's not all about just the blade work, like he thought. It's all about the movement coordination. It's all about the measure to his opponent. It's all about the constant evaluating of his targets and where he can quickly attack his opponent. Also, the moveset of our HEMA beginner is very basic. Either he's too passive, so he stays in one place and he's too defensive, or he's too aggressive with his attacks, which makes him very predictable in a fight. Of course, that's why he loses often. But he learns that through grit and through pain of coordination, he learns a few more tricks up his sleeve than just basic swinging of a sword. He understands the context that even a small cut can decide the outcome of the fight. He knows that there is no point of doing wide motion just like in games, like it's Dark Souls. That a simple moveset can win in a sword fight, and it doesn't need to be complex. Of course, the HEMA beginner doesn't know any names of techniques whatsoever. His moveset is based only around very basic downward cuts or maybe horizontal cuts. And of course without thrusting, because these weapons are not made for thrusting. And he lacks his footwork. He doesn't know how to use his footwork to the fullest potential. So most often than not, he stays lazy, he stays complacent with his movement and focuses more on his blade, which of course leads to him losing most often than not. Also, the HEMA beginner thinks that Olympic fencing is total garbage and that these fencers are not real warriors because they don't fight with real medieval weapons like we do. Also, he thinks that Olympic fencing rule set, which is right of way, is total shit as well. But later on, in the next stages, he starts to change his mind about it. However, he still lacks tempo, he still lacks coordination, and he doesn't know how to stay calm under the chaos of sword fighting. He has problems with it. And that's why the 90% of people quit in this specific stage, because they feel like progress is too slow. And I'll be totally honest with you. This is where you should just stay grounded, where you have to show up time and time again to your practice, to your class, or just drilling anything, just like beginner techniques, if you can, in your home. In this specific stage, this is where people stop being just a dreamer and they start to be a practitioner of sword fighting. They start to become swordsmen. It is just a necessary evil to go through. In this stage, the HEMA beginner learns discipline, learns courage, and learns that pain is somewhat good because it drives them forward. And that's why I have my community from gamer to swordsman, where I talk about this more, where I have my mega course for beginners who are starting out HEMA longsword journey for themselves. You can check out the link in the description, which is also a community of guys who are training the same skill as you are. This is a perfect place for beginners if you're just starting out your sword fighting journey. The next one is level 3, the full gear intermediate. What separates him from the beginner is that he buys his full gear for the first time, which is a problem for him, because some parts of his gear don't fit him right, even when he checked countless times the size for specific gear, and he feels like hell inside of his so-called armor. After just a few minutes of training, not even sparring, just training, he sweats like crazy and feels like sauna inside of his gear. And some parts of his gear sometimes just fall off, which is infuriating, yes, but it's just the nature of it. Also, in this stage, the full gear intermediate commits to just one weapon. As you can see, for me it's longsword, but as I said, it could be a longsword or a saber, and some added on side weapons, like side picks, like sword and buckler, rapier with dagger, or a messer, and even more than that. The full gear intermediate also stops to think that Olympic fencing is a total shit and sees some upsides to it. He sees that Olympic fencers have better, more intense footwork than HEMAists do. He knows now clearly that the footwork is one of the fundamentals in sword fighting, because it lets him to do more techniques than he ever dreamt of doing. So what is the basic moveset of the full gear intermediate? The full gear intermediate knows much more than just downward cuts. He starts to learn his first thrusts, so his first precision strikes with a point of his sword, which is really hard at the beginning. And he fears of wounding his sparring partner or getting wounded by his sparring partner when they do a perfect thrust into him. And the first thrust that they connect, most often than not, is unintentional. It was made after some weird cut, and it was just a coincidence that the cut was too short, but he was just right there with his point. Also, his moveset is upgraded with his tempo, with his footwork, with his movement, and also with his panic control. He now knows the importance of the mind game, the mental health in this kind of sport, where you have to stay calm under the real pressure of a situation where another person wants to hit you back as much as you do. The full gear intermediate also knows how to defend himself pretty effectively, adding on footwork to his defense as well, because he knows that just the blade work doesn't do anything. He has to move his feet at himself to create distance to his opponent, or use distance against his opponent to quickly cut maybe his left hand from the other side. So the full gear intermediate knows how to feint his attacks as well, and also knows much more specific techniques with his weapon category. For example, he knows how to do a zwerchhau, or he knows how to do a schildhau, and much more than that. He gets into the rabbit hole of different techniques that at the beginning doesn't work for him, but through his consistency and through his grind, he starts to connect them. He starts to do them successfully. So this stage is the so-called grind zone of our HEMAist. This is where he commits fully to his art, where he has to grind every class against every opponent. Also, the full gear intermediate starts to teach beginners in this craft and giving them advice on their form. He corrects NPCs about the usage of a sword and medieval combat. And also he realizes how much he knows now. For the first time in his life, he starts to acknowledge that he is the swordsman right now. And over time, he adopts a real self-belief that he is a swordsman. And it becomes a part of his real identity. And this is where the real fun begins. This is finally when you start to see yourself as a swordsman. Now it's part of your identity. The next one is level 4, the tournament seeker. He starts to travel, compete in tournaments, and he often loses. But he also starts to win through patience. He finally feels like a true martial artist, not just a swordsman, but a student of human performance. The tournament seeker is dangerous but humble. He's confident but disciplined. And he realizes that every sparring match, every tournament fight is against himself. It's not just about winning against your opponent. He now knows that it's all about defeating his own laziness inside of him, that he can go further than he is right now. In this stage, you don't just ask, how do I win? You also start to ask yourself and others, how do I grow further? And that would be for all. But there is one last secret level left, which is the level 5, the lifelong master. The lifelong master is the embodiment of a true swordsman. In this stage, he is the purest warrior incarnate. He is the most knowledgeable and the most helpful guy that you will ever meet inside of this environment, because he wants to help others. He is not just a master in his craft, but he also is a coach, a mentor for his brothers. He is a teacher for beginners and intermediates. Also, the lifelong master is a very good fighter with any kind of sword, with any kind of medieval weapon. He knows how to defeat you with maybe with a shorter sword. Of course, this stage is where most of the older guys are. Most guys who are in this stage, they are past their prime years, but they still do it because it's enjoyable for them. It is a path of their true nature in some sense. Their mission is still there, to be the best warrior imaginable, but also to be a good person as well, to help the beginners in their experience, to give advice to others, to teach them the techniques, maybe the fundamentals or the advanced movesets of any weapon imaginable. The lifelong master also read countless different historical fencing manuals about different fencing traditions, about different weapons and contexts, and he is still a medieval history passionate, but more in a practical sense. Also, most of these guys become judges in tournaments, but also they can become the tournament organizers themselves. They can create opportunities and chances of winning for the newer generation of fighters, of fencers. And they're proud of creating a legacy for the beginners to take up arms themselves and to go through this journey. Because it is a beautiful journey. It is hard, but it's very rewarding. Because it shows you who you are truly. The lifelong masters know very well that the sword fighting journey, being a swordsman, is the most fulfilling path that they could have chose in their lives. Maybe it doesn't bring as much money as they wanted it to, but they know that they are living their honest lives. And also that this thing is a very fun thing to do in their lives, than just waste their times in front of the screens watching someone play football or playing a video games. And also they want to help people in this kind of martial art. And I want to help you as well. If you're a beginner, if you're someone who just starting out this journey of sword fighting yourself, then I really recommend you to go deeper into this. If you trust me enough, if my content already helped you out in this niche, then you can go and check out the link in the description or the first pinned comment, which is my community called From Gamer to Swordsman, where I also have resources. So the longsword beginner's guide of how to actually start longsword or HEMA in general without any experience, without any equipment, with just you wanting it to do it, with just your drive. Inside I go deeper into that you don't need actually expensive gear to start. You just need to have basic knowledge and basic tools like a padded longsword and a fencing mask to actually start progressing through it pretty quickly. Also, there's countless drills feedback that I can give you on your forum. I already helped other guys to start their own journey and to go further. But also we have intermediate guys and masters inside of this community. So check out the link in the description if you want to learn more. And yes. And remember, always take the initiative.